Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, a YouGov poll for The Times suggests that for the first time there are now more voters in favour of a second referendum on the final Brexit deal than those against. 42% of those polls said they thought there should be a referendum on the terms of Britain's exit from the EU. 18% were undecided. Well, joining me to discuss this is Paul Goldsmith, co-author of the book How to Lose a Referendum. Paul, good to see you.
Nice to see
you. Are we
Gamal.
stuck?
We are a bit stuck, and there's a reason for this. The 2016 referendum was negligently designed. It was done by David Cameron and the government with no intention of delivering a result. So we've ended up with Theresa May trying to deliver a result she doesn't really believe in and has no instructions for. Because a vote to leave could mean staying in the single market, customs union, different ideas on immigration. So we're stuck with a checkers deal, which most Leave voters think is a betrayal, or no deal, which really gives nothing to anybody. There's also a second problem, which is that Remainers also want a second referendum, and this is where the push is coming from. And they believe that Leave voters were duped in the first referendum, also that many Leave voters are dying out, and also, most importantly, is that once you see the details of the vote and the consequences and the costs of Brexit, in their view, you might want a chance to think again.
So what would you say were the main arguments for and against holding a second referendum?
Well, I think the argument for is quite simply that constitutionally the government is deadlocked, Parliament is deadlocked. Unfortunately, the people are also deadlocked as well. But quite simply, the government weren't given the instructions that the referendum was supposed to give it. It was called a pre-legislative referendum in that they hadn't come up with what they were going to do. There was no plan for delivering it, so they need further instructions. The argument against is that Leave voters will feel betrayed. They will see that Theresa May has essentially neutered Brexit because she didn't really believe in it. And they'll also essentially argue that the government leaflet that they published said, "We will deliver the result."
So, sounds like a mess. How do we get out of it?
So, there is a belief that you could do this second referendum. There is an argument for it, and
What about those 17.4 million people who said, look, we know what we voted for, out of the single market, out of the customs union, this is what we were told by David Cameron and George Osborne?
But they didn't vote for that. Yes, they were told it. Not all of them voted for out of the single market and out of the customs union. They were told that there would be an easy trade deal. They didn't necessarily vote, not all of them, to make themselves poorer. They didn't necessarily vote to be in a situation where the supply chain to their company wasn't working anymore. We don't actually know what they were voting for because the only word on that referendum ballot was leave. So what we kind of need to do is try and sort that out. And a second referendum is one way of doing that.
If there was another referendum, what way would Theresa May go? What would she vote for?
Well, she would have to present the deal. And one of the questions that you could have would be, do you want to remain in the European Union or leave via the deal that the government has arranged? You could also have three choices. This is Justin Greening's idea last week. So you've got Remain, no deal or deal. But that causes problems because Remain might get 49% of first preferences. Then Justin Greening suggests you have second preferences, which could then put deal and no deal up at 51% and Remain having won massively the first time. But the design of the referendum is actually far more complicated. The truth is this goes back to 2016, where a Prime Minister decided to hold a referendum with no plan to deliver one of the outcomes and stop the civil service from planning it as well.
Do you think the Prime Minister would nail her colours to the mast like a predecessor did, though?
She will probably have to back the deal that she's made because she's worked incredibly hard on it. Now, some Leave voters will say she's made some mistakes. We invoked Article 50 way too early. We agreed to the Irish backstop. We agreed to give money, which meant that we basically got rid of all our cards far too early. But she will have to back the deal, which means that a Remain campaign, if that's the side of the referendum, could present themselves as an alternative government. And what I would advise them to do in that case is to basically say to Leave voters, we understand why you voted Leave, and what we're going to do is, if we Remain, here are some policies that we would put in place to try and address the reasons you voted Leave.
But how do we know we're not going to have the same outcome if we did have a second referendum? How do we know that it's not going to be just as close as the last one 2 years ago? We're going to have the same position. The country will remain being divided?
It will remain being divided. We don't know what the outcome would be. It could be very close.
So what's the point of another referendum then?
The question is, what was the point of holding the first referendum with no plan at all to deliver it? A second referendum is a possibility, and there are arguments for it. And in the end, a very clever second referendum campaign by a group saying to remain, but also to address the reasons why many Leave voters voted for it, with a proper positive educational campaign about the EU, with young people appealing to their grandparents, you voted out to give me opportunities, but this is why I want to stay in the European Union. That could make a difference, because we can be British and European at the same time.
What is Europe thinking? Do you think the European EU27 would want another referendum, or do they just want the United Kingdom to get on with it and come up with a plan that they can accept so everybody can move on?
I don't think there is a plan that they can accept, apart from staying in the European Union, or perhaps the European Economic being part of the European Economic Association, the EEA. And that's because, ultimately, this is a political construct, the European Union. Economics doesn't matter to them. This has kept peace in Europe for a long time. And, ultimately, it's Britain's choice. And the Europeans are not that happy about it, but certainly what they're not going to do is give them a deal which leaves them better off than before.
One-word answer, are we going to crash out onto WTO rules?
At the moment, yes.
OK, interesting. Paul, thank you.